All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 11:31 by my computer clock, and I do want to be conscious of everybody's time. First, I want to thank all of you for joining us. This is our Lunch and Learn hosted by the Culture of Engagement Committee, and I want to give a special thanks to Carrie Brown. She's our county administrator. She is here to kind of talk to us a little bit about today. She formulates, acts, and implements policies on behalf of the County Board of Commissioners. She has 3 advanced degrees and over 25 years of executive leadership. So I'm really excited to hear what she has to say today, and I hope that you can join us in a virtual round of applause to welcome Carrie. And I'm going to turn it over to her, and let's take a listen.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you everyone from DD. Really appreciate your partnership, appreciate the work that you do every day. I often say that government is at its best when it is supporting those that might be marginalized, and I really appreciate all that you do for the clients and for those that are sometimes silenced in their voice. So we appreciate your work here from the County Commissioner's Office, and also feel a great bit of a kindred spirit in terms of doing the best that we can to accomplish our county mission. So today we'll talk a little bit about resilience and positivity, which I want to say thank you for bringing this topic to my attention. It is something that's important during times of challenge and times of something like a pandemic, that is for sure. It's also something that's important to think about on an everyday basis, because there isn't a time in which we don't have challenges, even if they're not as stressful or complex as a pandemic. We'll evaluate 2 different key factors for resilience in the workplace, and I'm using the word resilience often because sometimes when people think of positivity, there is a thought process that goes to whether one is inherently positive or optimistic just as a personality trait versus something that can be learned. And that's why I'm thinking about resilience as a learned skill, optimism as well, but something that can be put in the workplace like any other skill, such as leadership, and bring that into your work as a way that is helpful to you with your career path and also helpful to the work that you're accomplishing. And we'll give some tips about high-level performance while under pressure. So that was from my conversation with Cindy earlier, that she thought that would be a good agenda, and I think that's what everybody is expecting. And I'm seeing a little bit of a nod here and there, so I think I'll go on then to the next thought about, are you burned out? So there are a couple different concepts to think about when we think about stress, because of course we are all in very stressful environments. So I like that picture of the zebra just losing its stripes, because I think it's a visual that can make us all feel a bit that way from time to time, because we might be losing our hair or losing some other kind of stripe, as you will, a metaphorical stripe. And so I think it's stress is what the zebra is saying. And stress does have a different meaning for different people, and a very generic type of definition would be just this non-specific response of the body to any demand. But usually what people are thinking about is burnout, that prolonged response, about chronic emotional interpersonal stressors, where you see things like the concepts of exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. And really, in our environments, we often also find compassion fatigue. And that's that stress that results from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. I see that in Child Protective Services and the dog shelter, and I'm sure that DD is experiencing this in the social services environment on an everyday basis. And one of the things that's best with compassion fatigue is supervisory support. That is the one thing that is a counteractive force to compassion fatigue is supervisory support. So if you're a supervisor listening, think about that and the power that you have to help lift that sort of concept of fatigue. So what is resilience? We'll start with a quote from Elizabeth Lucas. "The forces of fate that bear down on a man and threaten to break him also have a capacity to ennoble him." So we always think about our generation's responses to the challenges that we have, and I think that our generation has an opportunity to respond to the pandemic and even to the questions about racism and other very important issues of the day in a way that will show our resilience and even in a bit of a process of being ennobled. So as we think about this definition of resilience, it's the process of adapting well. You'll hear me use the word flexibility because I think being flexible is probably one of the best skills that we're going to have to find our way through these complex challenges, because we're going to be adapting in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedies, threats, and these significant sources of stress. And that can come from family and relationship problems, health problems, workplace, financial stress, a number of different ways. But I like to just see this visual here in this resilient flower that's finding its way through a very stressful environment. And I like to think of many of our employees doing that same thing. And I find that definition of the American Psychological Association to be very helpful. As we think about real life examples of resilience, many of you have heard about Jimmy Dunn, a tremendous business person, tremendous sports figure who made some crucial decisions following the 9/11 attack, where he was making those very crucial decisions to be supportive of families and finding a way to carry on with his business, and really made that rebuilding as a moral imperative. And one of the things that I recall from a 60 Minutes special was that he acknowledged that in quiet times, he was very upset, very stressed, exhausted. But when he stayed busy with a purpose, it was very helpful and it guided his way. And I think that's just one aspect of resilience that comes into our work as well. It's a lesson we can learn as we think about the purpose and how we are focused on looking forward and rebuilding things with a moral imperative. Now, these 10 factors are resilience factors that help with an ability to shape us back, put us back to that elasticity. We have a cartoon. He appears to have lost all of his resilience. And I think I emailed this to Ann last night. It was very late. My day was ending a lot later than I thought it would. And I really did feel like that. The man in the picture there, where I was just basically melted into my chair and just trying to hit that last send button to get the slideshow to her. But there's some factors that can lift up your resilience. You think about things like realistic optimism, not the Pollyanna kind of optimism, but a very realistic way to look at the world, facing our fears. And then we're going to talk about those two things a little bit more and give some examples. But never forget your moral compass, spirituality and religion. That's different to everybody, and it's something that can really be a strong foundation and underpinning to build that resilience and positivity. Social support, whether those are and other people that you can share information and share what you're experiencing and have these shared ideas about how to deal with challenges and problems. Your role models, whether those are your supervisors, people that have been your mentors. Certainly getting some exercise. I try to take a walk every day, even if it's around the block. And there was a time when I did that much more. And I felt better when I took more time to do that. So it's always good to understand that there are balances between what you can do for yourself and do for others, and make sure that you do get some exercise in your day. Cognitive and emotional training, whether that's a very formal training, and I know that you have those through your associations. And cognitive emotional flexibility. And again, just finding that purpose. And Dee Dee does a terrific job in finding ways to be a part of the community and also that higher purpose and calling for your work. So with this first factor, let's just think about optimism a bit. It's this fuel for resilience. It's what makes it go. It provides that energy to power all those other resilience factors, all the 9 other factors. So if we had to define optimism, we would say it's this future-oriented attitude, having hope and confidence that things will turn out well. And maybe that comes from a set of experiences over time where things did turn out well. And maybe you're still building that in terms of being early in your career, or perhaps you're still building that just based upon whatever point in time and in your own development and in your own life. It's just this confidence that things will turn out well. And here's a quote from Henry Ford that I just love. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. It's just that power of that optimism, the power of how one thinks about how one can address a challenge, meet their goals, meet their work objectives. It's probably good to pause for a moment and think about the styles of optimism. You may have heard of this book, Learned Optimism, and I recommend it if you haven't read it. It's several years ago, but it is something that it's on my shelf over here, and it's a very inspirational book. There's a story of a young woman who was born with spinal lymphoma, and she becomes an athlete, a swimmer in the Paralympics, and she's a graduate of Yale, I think, Yale or Harvard, a graduate, and she really has that hopefulness and that ongoing spirit and energy that is a good example of dispositional optimism that pervades the overall outlook on life. And one can also have situational optimism, just being hopeful of a favorable outcome, but perhaps not with every situation, but just one situation. I like to think about realistic optimism. This is where you can pay attention to that negative information, but not focus on that. Just turn your energy on the problems you believe you can solve. I have examples of this every day where something seems insurmountable, but I turn my attention to what I believe can be solved. And I know about the negative information, but I try to address that, but that's not my full focus. So that pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjusts those sails. I like to think of myself as a realistic optimism example, and perhaps others might think that I'm overly optimistic, but I can say this, that there's never been a problem that hasn't been able to be addressed, at least significantly, when people come together and have their minds set on ways that they believe they can solve problems and bring something to the table that gives a more positive reappraisal of the situation. So optimism influences resilience. It lifts it up, it builds it up. This positive emotion comes to this increased attention, this increased creativity and flexibility. Now, creativity, I like to pause on that for a second, because just a couple of days ago, someone asked me, who is the most creative person you know? And, I thought for a moment, and I answered about members of my family, my grandfather, my father, my mother, my husband, my children. And it surprised the interviewer because they're used to getting answers about somebody famous, an artist, or, something that has this element of celebrity to it. And I think it's good to think about creativity that's all around us every day. When we frame it that way, you really do see great examples of innovation, and it really is right in your own world, right in your own office, right in your own family. And I like to just pause and share that with you and be aware of that creativity that's around you. These coping skills that come from optimism is this positive reappraisal, that reappraisal of the problem, being goal-oriented and infusing this meaning into everyday events, this true meaning into everyday activities. So this is just a case presentation. It's a little more difficult to have a case presentation during a Zoom meeting, but let's just imagine a situation where you have a case manager at the end of a very stressful day, and this case manager has burdensome caseloads. We know everybody has more cases and more work than they can humanly meet, but they're still doing the best they can. And this case manager is thinking about her decisions of a very difficult case of the day. And a supervisor approaches her with just a list of all the things that went wrong, just a list of negative feedback about this very case that she's listening, and maybe not even with bad intentions, just trying to say, here's all the things that we need to change about that particular case. And this negative feedback is provided in front of her peers at the end of the day. And she's feeling like a failure. This individual's wondering if she's even cut out to be, part of DD or part of public service. I'm not even sure if this is right for me. And the challenges just keep getting more and more complex, and she's just questioning whether she's making anything better. Now, so that's our case presentation. I'm sure everybody has been there at some point in time. And, just imagine that you've overheard this interaction and you want to identify some of that pessimistic thinking. And if you're the supervisor of the supervisor, how can you help? What can you do to help reduce this compassion fatigue and make things better just by changing your thinking? So I'm sure you can identify the pessimistic thinking that's within the case. I'm sure you can identify some different things that could be done in a different way, whether that is thinking about, hey, here are some things that went well, and here's some things that we can learn of for the future. And let's do that privately so we don't embarrass. And maybe just ask the case manager, how are you doing today? How'd it go? Is it going okay? Is there anything I can do? Do you just want to sit for 10 minutes and, just tell me how things went? And you never know how that moment can be so important to the individual because they've been through a day of many challenges. And then almost always the question that will come back, I'm doing okay, but I want to share this with you. How are you doing? And then you see this enhanced sharing and some positive conversation that's going on. So we think about that pessimistic thinking, these negative cognitive distortions. So the negative cognitive distortions from the case manager is thinking this is going to last forever and thinking I'm not even going to be able to do this work at any point in time, making that universality mistake, that cognitive change with that optimistic approach. We can have the positive reappraisal, just reframe that. These consequences are temporary and limited in scope, and here's what I can do and learn from this for my next interaction, which really brings such a positive way to think about that next work day and the next things that build upon that from the supervisor support. So we have this refuting of negative thinking that will increase the positive thinking that's just going to enhance that optimism and build resilience. So when something bad happens, I would suggest that one of the best things that can be done is first think, this will not last forever. Just make that sentence in your head or even say it out loud. This will not last forever. And keep that negative right where it is. Don't let it pervade other areas of your life or define your work or define what is going on relating to your agency or relating to your department. Have some positive people around you. Join in some conversations and say, hey, Ann, I'd like to talk to you about this a little bit and tell me what your perceptions are. I really need your support. And I'm sure that you have people you can call upon for those sorts of things. And make a point that you want to be one of those people that someone can call upon. And take actions and be purposeful. Identify that action that you want to take to make things better. And I put in here a bold base that even in a tough time, there are acts of kindness, and notice that, acknowledge that, because it really can help you and help the other person, because everybody is going to be experiencing whatever this bad thing is together, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And when something good happens, give yourself time to feel good about that. It is a good thing to reflect. I mean, adults learn a lot on reflection and, learn about what that is so you can keep it with you for the next time, good or bad, and allow yourself to feel good about your part in making something good happen. And I bold-faced my favorite, to be grateful for others that help the good thing happen. Because, again, nothing happens in a vacuum, and there have been people to help you with that success or solve that problem. One of the things I love to do is send a note. Thank you for what you did on this particular project, or even an email or a gem or whatever it is that gives a moment to allow individuals just to know that you were thinking of them for helping you solve that problem and get the most out of it. How can you get the most out of it? Share yourself in some way. If you journalize, it's a great thing to journalize. Share it with your supervisor, share it with another person, your mentor, or even your family. Just keep the discussion going so you can build upon those good things that happen. So one thing we can think about is a practice of gratitude. Years ago, many years ago, I think it was around 1999, I know that because it's about the time that I was starting at a child support agency. I decided every morning I was going to just list 3 things I was thankful for. And that was very helpful. I did that for years. And sometimes, of course, there's a repeat in that. There's some repetition. But I changed that a few years ago and made it more of a positive reflection exercise. So not only did I think about the 3 things for which I'm grateful, but I added this intentional action, an intention for the day. So I'm a big list maker, but I have multiple lists. And one list, of course, is this is the one thing that must happen this day, and that's my intention for the day. And then I end the day, rather than beginning it, I end it with these 3 specific events or interactions, which I'm very grateful. And then I recall those in the morning. And I have found that to just be a little more powerful. I loved, being thankful for 3 things, but by having this intentional action and then recalling that from the day before, it just made it a little more definite and a little more specific to what I was trying to accomplish in my life. And I think that's something I wanted to share, just to encourage that type of reflection exercise. And it really becomes a habit. After several weeks, it becomes a habit. It just becomes part of what you do every day. And there's a gratitude journal as well. A couple times a week, 1 to 3 times a week for 10 to 15 minutes, list 5 things for which you're grateful from the day or from the week, whatever works for you. And there's a lot of research to show that just being grateful and having gratitude, and John's heard me talk about this before at a elected official and department head meeting, but that is a very powerful concept that research is showing is a good part of leadership, a good part of optimism, in a way that helps people meet their goals and reduce compassion fatigue. So let's talk a bit about the resilience factor number 2. Factor number 2, facing a fear. So there are 6 different points to think about as we face this fear. To conquer it, we must face it, and that's just part of what resilient people do. You view it as a guide. The fear is there for a reason. Listen to it, let it flow. I think I tell this to my children all the time. Let them flow. They mean something, and pay attention to them. Use it as a guide. Think about that opportunity that comes from the fear. As I thought about earlier this week, fearful about a funding situation, and the opportunity that came from it is, if I can solve this, 87 other counties can have an opportunity to solve it as well, and maybe even some other states. So I'm going to dig into this, and I saw that opportunity, and it did come to fruition, to where that information and that work allowed for others to be supported and helped in the same kind of crisis. Learn and practice these skills to master the fear. Just remember, everything is a learned skill as we think about facing fear, building resilience. Again, sharing with your friends and colleagues. And if you need that spiritual support, of course, it's a wonderful underpinning to have, use that, turn to that, because it's an important thing to build resilience. So here's the next case. We'll just speak to about how we know that, more than 90% of people are going to have some kind of trauma in their work life at some point. This is a very common thing in a lifetime of work. So here's a facing fear case where an intern is assaulted by a client suffering from mental illness. Wasn't her client. She didn't see this client heading toward her, and she's very shaken by this experience. And she calls her supervisor and leaves for the day. And I want you to put yourself into the role of the supervisor about how you can guide the intern in facing her fear and returning to work, especially if she's thinking about moving away from the practice altogether. What are some of the things that you could do to be helpful, to help use fear as a guide, to think about the opportunities to learn, what you might be able to do in the future, whether it's how you might situate yourself physically or just be aware of your surroundings. And the same thing, just being able to offer different resources so that when you're fearful about a problem, you can think about a way to solve that problem and help yourself and help others. Give that a little bit of thought. And I know it's a Zoom meeting and we can't really have an exchange, but we can think about this flexibility during times of crisis. Stay flexible in times of fear is a difficult thing. We all recognize that people are going to hunker down and kind of retreat into survival mode. And there's a lot of fear surrounding the pandemic, for example, and we need to acknowledge that and understand and have empathy for, this concept of fear surrounding something that's very scary and undefined in a lot of our lives. Evidence shows that mood is associated with its ability to be flexible. So I think about that flexibility as a shield against anxiety. If we needed vitamins or medicine of some sort, we would take that in order to shield ourselves from whatever we're trying to treat. I think that if we reframe this idea of flexibility in our minds, that it's something that we prescribe to ourselves so that we can focus our mind on possibilities rather than deficiencies. And you guys are great on focusing on those possibilities. I hear that in your mission statement, and I hear it in all of the work that you do. And I think that's just one thing that we can do in every part of our life. Just use this concept of adaptability and flexibility as something that can prepare you for those possibilities. It's a skill set that can be learned like any other skill set, and it does take practice. Have a couple other ideas. Just keep your spirits up with that understanding of your noble purpose. And don't forget the Employee Assistance Program. I printed off the one from Optum, and there are multiple ones that are available, but there are many benefits that relate to the Employee Assistance Program. Even if you just wanted to call and talk about a problem, maybe something that's even a financial problem. I had an employee who came to me with a problem relating to some personal finances, and I wanted to help, and I helped in some way, but we often don't realize that the Employee Assistance Program is there to do some things that supervisors are not as equipped to do, and it's free, and it's confidential, and they'll just talk about any topic at all, and I really want to, encourage that program, and it's there for us to use, and please use it. And discussion with your trusted partners, your professional associations, mentors, and supervisors. And just recall that deliberance, being deliberate in your decisions, that is, be deliberate in your decisions. So I thank you for the time, and I think I did it almost exactly in a half hour, and I'll pause and see if there are any questions and things that you'd like to talk about more. I'll mute myself.
Folks, you can either type in the chat box, or if you just want to unmute yourself, if you have any questions for Carrie. I think we're all processing right now, Carrie. It's lots to think about.
Well, hopefully it's what you expected. From my conversation from Cindy, it seemed to be on target.
It absolutely was. We, as we all are going through this, we're all just trying to figure out the best way to steal John's line, to make lemonade with lemons. Did I say that right, John?
Yes, you did.
Well, Carrie, I want to thank you for your time today. And I can make sure that folks have your contact information if they have other questions as they kind of think about all of this. But thanks for all the work that you're doing for our county and for our agency. And I appreciate all of you taking time to join us today. And I think we'll call that a day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Stay positive.
Thank you, Carrie.
You too.